Goedenavond, blij dat u hier allemaal bent. Mijn naam is Bas Heijne en ik heb de eer om vanavond een gesprek te leiden tussen twee bijzondere mensen. Ik mag even we gaan straks in het Engels praten, maar het is altijd leuk om even in de eigen taal te beginnen. Brad Watson, een auteur die enorm veel geprezen is in Amerika, hier nog niet zo bekend. Hij heeft een heel bijzonder boek geschreven, wat ook zojuist vertaald, Miss Jane. En het is vertaald als juffrouw Jane. Nou, dat lijkt me een goede vertaling. En dat is een heel bijzonder en ook wat eigenaardig boek, een roman. En het raakt, denk ik, aan heel veel verschillende thema's. Het is een historische roman, het speelt in de vorige eeuw, begint vorige eeuw en eindigt zo eindigt 1980. Maar het is vooral historisch. Maar het is ook een roman die, denk ik, op een hele subtiele, rustige manier ons heel veel te zeggen heeft. En daar wil ik graag over praten met de schrijver. En dan in het tweede gedeelte, we krijgen eerst een gedeelte met hem en dan lees je aan het eind een stukje voor. Zodat u een beetje want het is vooral een ongelooflijk goede, prachtige stylist, een hele beeldende taal. En dan kunt u er wat van proeven als u het nog niet kent. Daarna vraag ik Markha Valenta erbij. Die is een universitair docent, moet ik zeggen, bij de Radboud Universiteit in Nijmegen. Maar ze is Amerikaans van origine en zeer betrokken bij de wereld van nu. Heel veel onderwerpen waar ze zich over uitspreekt, waar ze over schrijft. Ze trekken die thema's die in dit boek eigenlijk zo'n beetje rustig latent aanwezig zijn, trekt zij veel meer naar het heden. En ik denk dat het een hele mooie opzet wordt om daar met haar en Brad Watson te praten over het Amerika van nu, waar wij ook allemaal een beetje in leven. En wat dat voor ons en onze tijd te betekenen heeft en wat het zegt over het Amerika van nu. But first I like to invite Brad Watson on the stage. Ah, there he is. Please make yourself comfortable. Yes, it's possible to make yourself comfortable on these chairs. You've been for some days in Holland now, and your novel is very much an American novel in a way. You always described as a Southern writer, which is a kind of special niche within the American literature. But how are the reactions in a kind of more pragmatic, non-Gothic kind of in a country like the Netherlands on your work?
Is the mic working? The two writers I quoted in the beginning of the book, I didn't know if you noticed. One is the Swedish writer Lars Gustafsson,
yes,
and the other is Flaubert.
Yes.
So I really felt, when I was writing this book, I told my editor, who's been my editor for all my books at W.W. Norton, I was struggling with it a bit, and I said, and she was used to me writing, my previous novel was very much a Southern Gothic sort of novel. Mm-hmm. I said, I don't feel like I'm writing a Southern novel. I feel as if I'm reading a kind of a small, weird European novel. And she said, no, that doesn't surprise me. So I thought, okay, she understands me better than I understand myself. Yeah, I felt, I was very much interested in this character, and the fact that she lived on a small farm in Mississippi was not something that I felt was a limitation. It was just a part of one of the conditions.
Because she reads herself as a little girl. She reads Flaubert also.
Yeah, couldn't resist that.
No. Well, we'll get back to it. But first, I think to introduce you to a Dutch audience, I read your biography a bit, and it struck me because before you became a writer, you had quite a checkered career, I think.
It's been checkered ever since.
Ever since, okay. And one of the things I noticed was that you tried to make it in Hollywood. Now, I've been to Hollywood to write about people who are trying to make it there, and work in restaurants and do all kinds of jobs, and then they end up as second officer in a liquor store in some movie. But what made you go there and try out?
Well, I was an actor because I had been a juvenile delinquent in junior high. I was kicked out of Latin class and put into a chorus class, and the teacher wanted to put on a production of the musical Oliver. They were desegregating the schools at that time, and she wanted to put on a biracial production of Oliver. And she didn't have any boys in the class, and so she asked anyone who had boys who were misbehaving to throw them out and give them to her in chorus. So that's where I ended up. And because I had such a bad reputation, I guess I got to be the villain, Bill Sykes, in that play, and it was a lot of fun. I had been a jock before that, playing football, but I was the same size I am now, and I'd stopped growing, so I couldn't do that anymore, and I got the big thrill out of being on stage. I kept doing that, but then my girlfriend, when I was in junior in high school, my girlfriend and I eloped. We ran off across the state line and got married, and she was pregnant, and we had a child.
Okay.
And I went to work. In my senior year, I got out of school early, and I worked construction and supported us. My father thought that he feared I was doomed to a life of hard labor and digging ditches and things, and so we had a family friend who had a contact in Hollywood, was going to give me a job building sets, and I could go out and maybe I would be discovered, like Ava Gardner or something like that. And so I went out there. And as soon as I got there, there was a writer's strike, and the movie industry shut down. So I worked a lot of odd jobs in construction and selling ads for a newspaper and trying to sell fire alarms. It's a comedy of errors that I tried to write about many times and can't quite get it down. I ended up being a garbage man for an Armenian guy who had one truck and just one employee, and that was me. So I drove the truck, and I would get down, and I would get the bins and pull them up, put them back, run up, and I got in terrific shape. It was very...
Did you ever audition?
I did one audition with one director. It wasn't really an audition. It was an interview with a director, and I was this little southern boy taught to be polite. And when I finished the audition, the guy who got it for me said that the director told him he thought I was too nice and polite to be an actor. He didn't think I would be able to get up in front of an audience and just lay it all out there. And I was really angry about that because I thought, geez, I was just doing what I was taught to do. And if you give me a role, I'd be fine. But no, I blew it.
So that didn't work out in the end.
No.
You went back to Mississippi.
Went back to Mississippi and ran a bar for a while that my dad owned, and they talked me into going to college. I didn't think I was destined for higher education because of my choices, and but I took a test. They gave me a Hemingway story to read and to write an essay about it. I didn't even know it was a Hemingway story, and I wrote an essay, and they said it's very good, and they put me into an honors English class for freshman class, and that was the first time I really read seriously, read novels and fiction seriously, and I wanted to do it ever after that.
To write?
To write and to teach, because I had a great teacher. The guy who taught that class was really, really a wonderful teacher. But I had a lot of ground to make up because I had spent my youth, I had wasted a lot of time I had not,
Was it hard to become a writer?
It's still hard for me. I feel like I struggle with it. I know everyone struggles with it, trying to do it well. But yeah, and I also think that perhaps I don't really have the proper disposition. Acting, although I lost interest in it while I was out there, because I went so long being a garbage man, I actually forgot I was out there to be an actor. And when it came time for us to stay or go home, because we had a death in the family, I chose to go home, because I said, I don't really want to do this anymore. On the other hand, it was a lot of fun. And, you be up there on stage and you're part of a company doing this, and it's a collective effort, and there's a lot of energy, and you're moving, you're doing things, you're inhabiting other people with whose lines are already written for you. And in acting, in writing, of course, you're in the room by yourself, and just no one else can really help you.
No.
Until a certain point.
And was it hard in your circumstances to become a writer, to be taken seriously as a writer?
Yes, I don't think anyone had come out of my hometown and become a writer I don't know of anyone who had before I did. And then, so no one really took it seriously. I got laughed at quite a lot. I got mocked for it. Oh, sure, yeah, sure, you can do that. Because I was just this, little young idiot who got into trouble, and no one thought of me as a very thoughtful person. So no one, even my friends in college would mock me. It was sort of, it wasn't like now where you have so many creative writing programs, and so many people are actually, becoming writers, achieving that dream, and it seems much more plausible now that someone will come out and do it. Then it still seemed kind of unrealistic ambition, but I hung in there. I feel like I had thrown all in on that, and I was going to make it work, or it was going to go bust. It took a while because I was married. And then I was married again, and I was working all the time, and so it was all nights and weekends, and I was just at the point where I thought I can no longer work all day and then go home and work into the night until late at night. I can't keep doing this. And finally, I was able to get the first book published. And there was a setback in between there. I mean, I did go to graduate school, and one of the early writing programs, I didn't know what it was. One of my professors told me about it after I told him I decided not to get the PhD. And he said, well, there's this other thing. So I went over there and I did it. And everyone in my writing program also, they had the same idea. We were from a small city in the deep South, and none of them really thought they could make it. And so they all were laughing at themselves. But I have to say I refused to do that, because I kept trying. And most of them stopped. But there was a setback. At one point, all my personal life mistakes sort of caught up with me, plus the labor trying to be a writer, and I kind of burned out. So I went down to the Gulf Coast, and I worked as a journalist for a few years, and did a couple of other jobs writing ad copy. And I quit writing fiction. I said, I'm not going to do it anymore because I'm not enjoying it. I think I'm being far too derivative in the wrong way of other writers, and I'm not moving on. And I'm not going to do it again unless the calling really comes back. And after a few years, though, it did, and I started sort of quietly writing stories again and trying to enjoy it a little more. And writing in a more expansive way. I felt as if I had a sort of myopic view of what I was writing and what I could write, and I wanted to open that up a little more. And so I did. I was in my second marriage, and I plowed in again, and I would write. I had a full-time job, and I would write. I'd go away. I had a week off every year, and some friends had a small cottage on the Gulf Coast on the beach, not right on the water, but down there. And I would go down for those 7 days by myself, and I had an old antique portable typewriter. I would take it along and set it on the patio in the morning, and I made sure that I write a full draft of a short story that day. So, and then I would go for a run, and then I would come back and have a martini and make dinner, and then I would go to bed. And I'd take those 7 stories back, and I would tinker on them all year, and that's kind of how I got back into doing it.
Because it does sound that you not only had some, it was quite difficult to become a writer, but you also have a kind of relationship with writing you're not one of those, what we call a fail schrijver. I just looked it up, so I can say assembly line writer, someone who trots out novels, some better than others, but writing makes writing. You're much of a doubting writer, in a sense.
I'm an artiste.
Artiste, yeah, but not easygoing in that sense.
No. And I can't seem to stick with the project unless it means something more to me than just a job, or just a project. It has to somehow move me to really want to. I have to feel as if it really. I had to feel moved to write it. I can't just decide to write it and do it as an intellectual exercise. It just doesn't work for me.
And so how did this novel come about? it's a story. I won't. Well, if you summarize the story, I don't think it works because it's about.
Right.
It's a
There's
little
no plot.
no, and
That's
it's
great. No
also
kidding.
kind of trouble
Right.
that seems. The inwardness of the novel is very important, but it's about a girl growing up in the early, in the South, in the American South, in the early 20th century, who has a congenital. What's the word?
Birth defect.
Sorry.
Birth defect.
Birth defect, which is that she's incontinent and cannot have babies, probably not, or in the normal way. And the novel is briefly about her growing up, making her own life within this given situation and in the social situation which she grows up. But it's basically about making her own life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about figuring out how to live a life, a full life, even though her condition and other people's and society's attitude toward her condition would make her kind of a leper and ostracized. But she refuses to, she learns how not to see herself as some kind of a freak, with the help of her mentor friend and close friend, Dr. Thompson. Yeah, it's really in part it's a book about her education, partly through Dr. Thompson, and she's partly an autodidact also because she's thoughtful and she listens and she observes and she's patient as she can be, and she's attentive to nature, which finally allows her to see that she is just another natural phenomenon, I think, there. I don't think that would have happened for this character if she weren't isolated and living in a rural setting on this farm where the only child at the home really left at that house because it was she had to entertain herself, and part of that was being alone in the woods and on the farm and being observant and thinking and not being disturbed too much by other people's intrusive observations of her.
Now you stated that the character is based on a great aunt of yours.
Yeah,
Who would get the same condition, more or less?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my great aunt Jane was born in this book in 1915. I had a great aunt who was born in 1888, and she was a kind of a family story. She was a family mystery. There are photographs of her. All we knew about Aunt Jane was that she was incontinent, that she couldn't have children, that she never married, and that was about it. That she'd had some sort of condition since birth. No more. And people didn't really talk about it. They were country folk mostly, like the people in the book. I saw a photograph one time when I was with my mother. We were going through a shoebox full of old photographs, and I saw a photograph of a young woman or older teenage girl posing for the little snapshot camera, wearing an attractive sun hat and a nice little sundress, very thin, but pretty, and seeming to flirt with the camera. And I said, "Who is that?" My mother said, "That's Aunt Jane." I said, "She looks like she's flirting with someone taking the picture." She said, "Well, maybe. She was popular with the boys. She used to go to the dances up there in the community." I said, "How did she do that if she was incontinent and had the stigma?" She said, "I don't know." Because it's that sort of thing about their family, you know, these things happen and they just accept them at some point without asking questions because it wasn't polite, and then it just became the story. I thought, you know, and I thought more about, well, how did she do that? What if she did have a love interest or a boyfriend, and what, you know, how did she do that? If she did, how did she go to the dances, and then how did she get a boyfriend? And if she did those things, what was the outcome? knowing that in those times they could not do anything about her condition. So, what would it come to? There must have been some sort of little drama there. So I started to think about it. Also, my mom, I said I got curious about her, and this was long before I tried to write the book. That was when I was just beginning to write. I said, "Where's her grave? I wanted to go and see her grave." She said, "It's in the local cemetery. It's not up in the country. It's in town." She told me where it was, and I went looking for it, and I couldn't find it. And I came back, and her name was Jane. They called her Jane. She was Jane Clay. And I looked and couldn't find it. I went back, and I said, "I couldn't find it, but I found one that said Mary Ellis Clay, about the right dates." And Mom said, "Oh, yes, that was her." I said, "Well, why did they call her Jane? Why did she call herself Jane?" And she said, "I don't know." That was her family. So all the more mystery. I thought, did she do that deliberately? Did she choose that name for some reason? Was it, why?
And so what made you, that you were intrigued by her, I can well imagine, but at what point did you see her as a someone you could make a novel about with your imagining? At what point did you decide that? After I
published The Heaven of Mercury in 2002, I sort of naively thought that I could easily write a novel about this, inspired by this story, not thinking, well, what do I know about her? So I don't know anything about her story. There are almost no anecdotes. There are no medical records. No one knows exactly what her condition was. They don't know any of the details about her friendships, whether she actually had a boyfriend, what she did with herself on a day-to-day basis. I asked one cousin, I said, how did she survive after, because the real Jane lived with her parents on the farm till she was 40, and they died, and she moved to town, and I said, how did she live? They said, I don't know, maybe welfare. And I looked it up, and welfare began in the U.S. in 1935. That would have made her about 50 or 55. No, that would have made her 50-something, and or close to 50. So it was a mystery, She used to travel by bus to see brothers who had moved away to East Texas by herself, and loved to visit with them. And I went to see one of them, and I asked, "What was she like?" "Oh, she was fine." Did you talk about? Did you know what her condition was? "No, we didn't talk about that." Did you hang out with her? No, I didn't. What did she do? I don't really remember. There was nothing. And I had written this proposal to Norton saying, I imagine a story about a woman with this sort of condition. Her life was lived out this way, and this happens, and that happens, this happens. It was completely nonsense. It was just folderol.
How did they react?
They thought, that's a good idea, go ahead. And then I wrote a few drafts, and it was terrible. And I realized I didn't know anything. I could not write this novel, so I began to try to figure out what my great-aunt's condition might have been. I read all kinds of, I read a lot about urogenital birth defects, female urogenital birth defects, and tomes and on the internet, and I could not find anything that really made sense with my aunt, because most of the conditions involved a lot of constant infections and visits to the doctor in the hospital, sickliness, early death, and botched surgeries and so on. My aunt seemed to be healthy, although she was very thin. She was not constantly at the doctor, apparently. She lived from 1888 to 1975.
So what exactly was it that resonated with you? Because maybe the lack of details was something really good for a writer, because you could fill it in yourself.
One thing I think that made it resonate with me was that one thing everyone kept saying was they thought that Aunt Jane was a happy person, that she seemed always cheerful, and she never. The family had a sort of a history of being stoic. They were very stoic people. They did not complain. They were hardy country folk, and they had hard times, but they persevered, and she was one of them in that sense. But of course, she had more challenges. She had a greater challenge. But she never seemed to pity herself. And there I was, I'd already been doing my second marriage and having all kinds of opportunity for a love life and botching it. And here's this woman who did not have the opportunity and yet seemed to put forth the facade of contentment, whether or not that was true. And I was fascinated by that, and then I began to think that what was behind the facade. And you combine that with the mystery of her flirtatious photograph. I mean, it was truly flirtatious. It was, and the idea that she did go to the dances, and it just began to gather sort of into.
But it's also very much a conditioned, I don't know if I used the right word, a conditioned life. That is, she has to accept that she's unable to cross certain lines.
Yeah.
Some possibilities are cut off for her.
Yeah.
Many in that sense. So she also has to accept that.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, also part of her experience very much, that she's quite good at accepting that without losing her joy of life.
Without losing her composure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's where the doctor comes in, I guess, helping her. That and her general, her nature, her natural disposition, I think, which that hardy stoicism serves her well. But I think the doctor character in the book helps her to keep that from becoming something that finally is destructive. With her father, it's destructive and
Yes.
the self-destructive habits, and with the mother, it's the anger turns inward and sort of eats her alive, and the daughter, the older sister, Jane's older sister, simply wants to run away, and but Jane can't really run away and doesn't really want to. She just wants to understand who she is, and
She's not a rebel.
no, she's not a rebel. She's very independent, but she's not a rebel.
And that's maybe one of the reasons that this novel is described as a so-called quiet novel, in the sense that it's not about social issues, it's not about the outsider as a kind of rebel vicar or someone who protests inequalities or discrimination. It's much more inward.
It's a kind of an old-fashioned way of dealing with being an outsider, which is to live with a kind of quiet strength and dignity that is finally unassailable by others who would denigrate it.
Well, we go on and we ask Markha, but I would first like to ask you to read a passage from the novel.
Sure.
And then we ask Markha on stage, and she's read the novel too, and her impression of it, and when we talk about the more general issues about living in America at this time. Can I
Sure.
ask you to
I
read?
had chosen a passage before. I didn't know if it was something that's coordinated or not, but it's a good enough passage. This is when she is around 6 or 7 years old, and has been gradually awakening, the beginning of her awakening. Her parents and other members of her family had got to where they never said anything to her about her problem, except to tell her quietly to go change herself if she forgot about it, especially before a meal or if someone was dropping by for a visit. But now she thought about it quite a lot through the winter and into the spring, how she was different. It descended more deeply into her mind that she was the only one made the way she was made, that she was strange. She became accustomed to that flushing sense of shame that could come on and heat your face and make your scalp tingle and make you want to cry. Summer came early and then came on hard in June. It was very hot. She took to wearing light dresses and leaving off her diaper and staying outside in the shade most of the day, hopping behind a bush or a tree when she felt something coming on, instead of out in the open as she had when she was younger. She kept with her a catalog page she would tear a piece off of, use, and discard. And she would feel that flush of shame whenever it happened, and her mind would bristle with the sense of that strangeness. Ever since the day playing checkers with Mister, she had taken to washing her own diapers down at the creek instead of letting her mother or Grace take care of it. She would not put them in her mother's boiling pot for sterilizing washed undergarments until all the others had been removed. She was past her 6th birthday that November before it occurred to her that no one had even mentioned the possibility of attending school the next year. She went to where her mother sat mending a shirt on the front porch. Her mother looked up as she stood there. "What's the matter?" "I guess I won't be going to school next year like the rest." Her mother stopped her mending, though she looked down at it for a bit before meeting her daughter's eye again. "No," she said, "I don't see the sense in putting you through it." Then, more to herself, she said, "Most girls, I'd say it's a waste of time anyway." She looked a long moment at Jane again and said, "We will have to figure out something that you can do."
Thank you. Markha, will you come up to stage? Well, during dinner you said something very interesting about the role nature plays in this novel and how it compares with the relationship of most, I must say, Dutch with nature.
Yeah, well, because I was very curious about how you responded to the novel, because I was telling you, because there's two things that are funny in terms of what you said. One of the things is the first thing pretty much that I said to Brad when I met you this evening, so we just met for the first time, I said, "I loved your book," and then I said, what I really found in it was something of America that I've been missing when I'm here. So I thought it was funny when you said you thought you'd written, or your publisher was saying, right, you'd written a European novel. And I can imagine in terms of style and sensibility at moments that there's a kind of Europeanness to it. Yeah. But for me, it starts off, you've got those first 2 pages. And the first 2 pages, you're telling about Jane, or the narrator is telling about Jane, and about what she's not afraid of, and at moments what also she's a bit afraid of. And what she's not afraid of, and so many of the examples that are given are examples that are coming from nature, that have to do, with storms, that have to do with animals, with very particular animals, very particular situations. And it evokes, what happens is that in the process of telling us about, for me, how I felt it, is as you're telling about Jane in those first 2 pages, I right away get a sense of a very strong character, very anchored character. And at the same time, you're evoking the nature that she lives in, and her relation to it, and in the process of evoking the nature, you're evoking her. And that kind of fusing with nature, of being a person through being in nature, and in being in nature sort of feeling your personhood, is something to me that's very American, and that I can't easily imagine most Dutch people feeling. So I was saying...
Well, we have the water, of course.
Yes.
Well, we had.
But you don't want to immerse yourself and become one.
There's a special relationship with the water, but mostly because it's conquered now.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's not as strong. But when it was a dangerous place, then it was a kind of relationship. We have some works of literature that are about that. But I think for the rest, we don't have that much wildness or nature. And there's one passage in the novel in which she, in the early stage, when she walks and she feels a kind of sexual relationship with the nature. He says it's you catalog a lot of things, and you say then it was all a kind of sexual thing for her.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that passage. Yeah.
Well, not in a literal way, but in a kind of erotic way, more or less.
Yeah, I was trying to describe that phenomenon. We all feel, I think, when something moves us so much that we feel it physically as well as emotionally. And for that is a kind of sexual experience. I mean, a sensual experience. And for Jane, who doesn't have engaged in any kind of conventional form of sexual relations, that is her. That is something that approximates it or comes close to it, or.
See, but that's what I'm wondering, because I'm of 2 minds about it, because is it something, because you say, with Jane, you're saying, in a way, it's because she can't be sexual. So it becomes a way of experiencing the sensuality of life, precisely because she can't experience it through sexual relations with a man, with another person.
Yeah.
Okay. But at the same time, as I'm reading it, right, I'm experiencing it and I'm responding to it. And I don't know if that is because so many of us experience the sensuality of life and you're making it very visible and tangible, or if it is because I grew up gay in America in a time when I had to hide that and also could not express it and had to find these other ways. So is it, so am I recognizing my difference in her difference? Or am I recognizing, because then I'm really wondering about you. So you're a man, very heterosexual man. You're saying you're having your love life here, right, that she doesn't have. Does that mean that you feel very different from her, or do you recognize yourself in her?
Oh, I do recognize myself in her. I feel that it's also kind of universal. I think that feeling, that experience that she has. I mean, when I was including the experience of putting an oyster in your mouth and swallowing an oyster as being a sensual and homosexual experience, I mean, I still feel that way. Especially since I can't get them in Wyoming.
No, and I wanted it desperately. When I was reading it, I wanted an oyster.
Yeah, when I go back, I eat about 3 dozen the first day that I'm there. Yeah. So no, and also I was a kind of a loner and a dreamy kid and a weirdo. I identify with Jane in terms of being someone who's not like everybody else, just not in the same way and not in such a forbidding way, a difficult way. Mm-hmm. But I would go out into the woods a lot by myself and sit there and just try to soak it up. And it was a physical as well as an imaginative and emotional experience, always was. I mean, the smells and the animal life that begins to come alive when you're out there by yourself, and just the sense of being fully in yourself, by yourself. That is an experience that, if that's not a sort of sexual coming of age, I think that we've got too narrow of a definition.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It also seems that the novel is about loneliness in a way, that loneliness in itself can be quite fulfilling in a way. It's not like the isolated person is someone lost and is a kind of zielig, how do you say that? So a kind of pitiful figure, but it's someone with an inner life that is quite strong and quite maybe transcendent in itself.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what I really love about the story, is that it's as I'm reading it, I can see, that this is the person that I wouldn't have noticed, right? And it's the person that other people don't notice. So for much of her life, right, she was hidden. She was at least in some regards, and it's a very simple human life. And then, as you tell it, and through the telling, it's an incredibly rich life. And you manage to have both of those at the same time. So at least for me, right, always as I'm talking here, is one of the things I really, really loved is to feel both of those together, is the simplicity of it and the richness, and have those kind of pushing against each other without the one dominating the other. And so that, for me, that balance between those two.
Oh, that's really, I mean, what you're talking about there, I think that's why Flaubert's story, A Simple Heart, and Gustafson's story, Greatness Strikes Where It Pleases, were so important to me while I was writing this book, because Flaubert's story is about an uneducated girl, then woman, young woman, then older woman, who is really entirely alone. She's a servant, and she lives her life as a servant in various places until she ends up with an older woman in a little village, and she's very devoted. She lives a full life, but she doesn't have anyone. Actually, she lives a much more isolated life than Jane does. She never really has a close attachment with anyone that is reciprocated. She is in fact rejected in certain ways, more than Jane ever is in this book. And yet it's a triumphant life, and the story ends with her, and she has a parrot that she that's reciprocated, I suppose. Her relationship with Lulu the parrot, and she has a vision of the parrot at the end, hovering over her like a spirit. And so she goes out feeling love. And the story that Gustafson's story is about a boy, then man, who is so severely mentally retarded that he's inaccessible. He has no language, and he's basically inaccessible to other people. Yet Gustafson finds a way to write about his inner life in a way that's convincing and magnificent, so that you feel by the end of the story, when he's staring out the window in a way that people would just look at him and say, to use an outdated offensive term, idiot, but he's experiencing an amazing world that he has created in his own mind, and Gustafson manages to convey that and to illuminate it. That was my goal, to do something like that, like those stories did. With this
But how will a quiet novel like this survive in loud times like these are?
That's the that's the question, isn't it? You said quiet novel, and in the publishing business, I think they joke about that being the kiss of death, and don't say it's a quiet novel, But now we want a loud novel, a lot of action and high drama, right? But most lives don't really have that. So I don't know. I suppose you have to get lucky for it to survive in these times. People have to, word of mouth, people have to go around and say, well, in fact, I know that I've talked to a lot of people who, and I've seen little reviews on the internet where people say, I didn't think I would like this book. I read the synopsis and I thought, why would I want to read a book like that? And but then they say, but I read it. No, it's really good. They were surprised. I say, well, yeah, I wish they would get over their surprise.
Well, I think one of the things that
Lights are
made
making me hot,
it
excuse me.
special for
So
me.
is it okay? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
warm. A little
Some water.
warm. Oh, it's just the lights.
No, I can well understand if you say, here's a novel about an incontinent woman, that people would say,
Yeah,
well, I'll
right.
save that for later.
Yeah. That's the obstacle. Get over it.
One
No,
of the
but in a
things-
more general way, it's, as I say, the quiet novel, but it's also loud times in a different way, that this kind of inner life, it's not only Trump, but it's also the culture of the internet, of the people, identities, the war of identities, of new nationalism, of all kinds of strong feelings about culture, about the other. This kind of inwardness, I think, is a statement in itself. In this world, it's about otherness as a kind of, how would you say that?
Counterweight?
It's a counterweight. It's not a political novel. It's not a social statement. It's not an activist novel.
No.
Does that come through through readers? Do readers understand this kind of inner world that's somehow now that's not really appreciated in this culture we live in?
I think so. I haven't noticed that people see it as a book that is foremost championing any particular cause. Although people have commented on how some people say things like, "Oh, it seems a timely book." We're talking a lot about sexuality and gender and so forth these days, and that, maybe that'll help the book sales. But I don't really think that's entered into the politics of sales. With this book, it's just been. It's more the people who appreciated it have appreciated it because of the character, because of Jane, because it is a character study, a story of a life.
Yes.
And it is an entire life, and that's the other thing that I liked about my models here, was that Flaubert tells the story of Félicité in 50 pages, an entire life, and it seems full, it seems an entire life. And Gustafson tells the story of boy and man and his story in 12 pages, and it seems like a full and an entire life. It's an amazing story. It's a miracle of a short story. And I thought, well, if he can do it in 12, surely I can try to do it in 250 or 300 pages, you know. But that's the thing. I mean, it is topical in that sense, I think, but it's not a polemic, you know. It's about a person. It's just about a character.
Still, the social surroundings of the book, the people that you describe, is not only Miss Jane, but it's also the people around there. Those are the people that are now, after Trump won in 2016, are described as the people who felt left behind, who were protesting, who rose up against the kind of world they felt neglected by or spit upon even. Is that something you recognize? You grew up you were in Wyoming now.
I'm in Wyoming now, but I grew up in Mississippi.
Mississippi. So.
Yeah.
Is that something you noticed?
Wait, excuse me. Make the connection between the people in the book and those you're saying.
The kind of people, the poor people, the people that after Trump won suddenly had the spotlights on them and said, "Oh, we've forgotten about these people, and now they're very angry." Is that something you recognize? Is that an explanation that you agree with, or is it something?
I think that they have always felt left behind by just about every administration that's been up there. You know, I think that there are characters in this book, for instance, who I can see voting for Trump if he came along in their time. There's a scene in there when those people are on the porch and the doctor is treating them, and there are other folks like that. I don't see Jane having much truck with someone like Trump, because she's a very pragmatic person, not influenced by theatrics or the kinds of. Her family in the book, you know, is one that prides honesty, hard work, strength in the face of adversity. Living through hard times with dignity, which has nothing to do, I think, with this the kind of appeal that some people feel, you know, when they encounter Trump's ideas. That all has to do, I think, with anger and revenge and fear. I haven't read Woodward's book yet, but I know one thing: he got the right title. Because it's about fear, you know. It's about people having fear, and it's about fear mongering on his part of building that fear up. But these are people who didn't. Their fear is more existential, I guess. You know, it's about survival, and it's about creating who you are with your own hard work, and it's not about anyone saving you or doing anything for you. I mean, it takes place in part during the Depression, when there was no one to save you. And I saw this, I mean, my mother grew up during that time. And so she was a conservative person. She grew up on a farm in Mississippi in the 30s, 40s. But I like to think that she would not like that man, you know, and wouldn't believe him. There are other people in my extended family, I'm sure, who do, but I don't think my mother would. And my mother was, in part, actually an emotional model for Jane in this book, because I found it really difficult to imagine myself into the life of someone like my great aunt. I ironically kept seeing her as her condition. So there I was trying to write a book about her, but I realized that I was sort of treating her as the other myself. And I was writing about someone who was trying to transcend the fact that other people treated her like the other. So I realized that my mother had grown up on a farm very similar to Jane's, even though there was a generation between them, and that I could imagine my mother on her little farm, and I knew her. I was very close to her. I had a few little anecdotes, and once I started thinking, sort of superimposing my mother on Jane, or merging my memories of my mother with trying to imagine this character of Jane with this birth defect and making her into a real person and not just a condition that for which the person was a host, I began to be able to write real fiction and really write the story. And I'm sorry, that really wandered off topic.
No, maybe.
No, but I have a question.
Well, I have a question. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll ask that. Well,
You're
ask
the
your
chair,
question
go
first.
ahead.
Ask your
Okay.
question first.
Must
Ask
have
your
done a good
question.
job with that.
I have a question for you too, but ask yours first.
Well, because what I'm wondering is if the people you're talking about here, if they're political at all. Because I'm wondering if the thing is, because I had a question before that, which is, say they had to choose between Obama and McCain, who would Jane have, gone for? But then I had a question before that actually, which is, does she care about politics at all?
No, I don't
No.
think so.
Okay.
No.
Because then that's the thing that Trump does, right? Is that he pulls people, he gets them politicized. If before that, they might have had those feelings, they might be responsive to the fear.
Well, was that just because they didn't have anyone who so bald-facedly, baldly expressed their frustration and anger? I mean, because he knows how to say it. He knows how to speak the language that politicians don't normally speak and get away with it. And there are a lot of people out there who are angry about feeling left out, and Washington politics in general, don't really care about them. It's all phony and so on, and they don't see him as phony, which is the thing that really flabbergasts me. But leaves me flabbergasted, I guess I should say. But he's they don't. The irony is that the politician I see is the greatest phony among all phonies that I've seen in my lifetime, and there are a lot of phonies in there, seems to strike them as being honest and speaking the truth.
Is it also the promise, because I attended one of his speeches in the primaries in New Hampshire, and though it was a rambling speech like we used it, not without charisma, not without humor, there were some jokes in it, I had to laugh, I must confess. But he promised two things. I think to make a complicated world very simple again. He talks that you don't want us to talk about climate change. He said, look outside, it was a blizzard. So it's problem solved. And the other thing that he promises to take back control. Like in England, people have a sense that they have no control of their own lives. I will bring it back. Though their lives they're impossible. But it's a promise that the feeling that I think gives vent to a lot of frustration that people feel those needs.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by his winning? You're from the deep south, you're in Wyoming, but you're also an academic. You're teaching in university. I don't think there will be a lot of Trump voters in your daily surroundings at university.
No, not among. They don't admit it. But they are there. Yeah. So I go around campus now feeling a little bit paranoid. I was surprised. I thought that just because not because of the message, because I didn't think that they liked some things he was saying. I think, sure, they're going to like some things he's saying. Let's just smash this and pull this up, and it's going to be easy. And all we have to do is think, we have to stop, being mealy-mouthed about all this and just take the simple and straightforward approach. And it's simple, it's simple. Like government is simple. And I thought, they would like that idea, but they would see that Trump was unlikely to be someone who, would be able to deliver on most of that stuff, or at least deliver in a way that would stick. And I thought that they would also see that he was just P.T. Barnum, that he was just he was a show, and that. But then again, like I was thinking back, I thought, bad actors have never been rejected by the American voting public. Unfortunately, I think even some people I voted for, I thought were bad actors. I liked their policies, but they were just terrible. Ronald Reagan was a bad actor. I thought Bill Clinton was a bad actor. I wished I could have coached him, at times. But and Trump but actually Trump is actually a better actor than most of the politicians. He knows how to act in a way that they really, like you said, you laughed. They're laughing a lot harder. They think their joke is even better than you thought it was. But I thought they would see through that. But they were, I think you had people who were always been waiting for someone like Trump to come forward and allow them to say the things and feel the things and vote for the kinds of things that they didn't feel they could after the civil rights movement. The extremely conservatives in the Deep South, I think, felt cowed and defeated, in a sense, by the civil rights movement. They didn't accept a lot of it, and they continued to fight it. It was Brown versus Board of Education was passed in 55, I think 54, 55. They did not desegregate the schools in my state until 1970, when the courts forced them to do it, and they did it in the middle of the year because they said, we'll shut you down if you don't, and that's the only reason they did. So they didn't stop fighting it. But people gradually from the 60s on, fell back, say, this is not acceptable. I know, I still feel it, but it's not acceptable to say these things and act this way. And there was the illusion that maybe people would gradually soften and begin to accept and open up and become more inclusive in their attitude toward other people. But no, I don't think that's really the case with a lot of them. They were just seething, I think was the word we used, seething, because they still felt those prejudices, they still felt that hatred, that resentment, and this has given them license to voice it, and it's a catharsis. So I think what we're seeing down there is a kind of cathartic movement, and I don't know if, like in the tragedy, the catharsis will be woof, and then that's better. I'm over now. We can get rid of Trump. But I'm afraid maybe it won't. Yeah. I don't know.
Markha, for you, a question: were you surprised, because you are an academic too, and you are a progressive, I could call that, and suddenly things are not moving the way that they're supposed to move, and of course there's a lot of criticism of the left also, that they said no, the left has concentrated on identity politics and has left the people you describe behind, and they were more interested in social issues, not in identity politics. So how was your reaction to the election of Trump?
Yeah, well,
was it a shock?
No, for me it was a surprise, but it wasn't a shock. So it was a surprise. So I had been, there's certain, because I teach about American politics, so I'd been following it very, very closely, and so I hadn't just been relying on, say, news sources like the New York Times or CNN, but I'd also been looking at other sources. And those other sources were saying that the race was actually very, very close, within 3 percentage points. And the overwhelming prediction, something like 70%, was that Clinton would win, but it wasn't 99%, it wasn't even 90%, it was 70%. So I knew that actually that's, that there's still, a chunk there. So when it happened, then I had already been prepared for that kind of result as a possibility. And I think in that way I saw that I was pretty different from a lot of people around me. In terms of the resentment, I have a personal history, which is just that I went to graduate school in Iowa. And because of that, I've seen the kinds of responses people have to Iowa. So when I was going out there, Iowa is a bit as if I'm going to the Achterhoek or something like that. So I'm in the middle of the country. And, people are like, why are you going there? I mean, I had a fantastic scholarship, so I had good reasons. But I was coming from the East Coast, and people were just like, Iowa, what are you doing there? When I was at Iowa and we were teaching our students, there was a lot of condescension towards our students sometimes. You would have students who would be very nationalistic. They wouldn't read a poem by a Vietnamese because they said, my country right or wrong, so I'm not going to read an anti-Vietnam poem, period. So you had a lot of nationalism, but people were very condescending. And then the condescension hit me because I got a degree at Iowa and I would go to conferences and people would hear that. And then sometimes I've had that people would stop talking to me or people would find me much less interesting. So the way in which you have this connection of region and status and being taken seriously, right, was something that I had experienced in part from being there. I also lived on a farm there. And so I understood some of where that resentment was coming from. It wasn't the resentment. I feel I don't come from a working class rural background, but I'd spent just enough time there. And I touched sort of what the reactions were that I could see it was making sense to me, what some of what that fury was. So I think in the sense of, making sense of Trump, right? I had two kinds of sources as a scholar of American politics and as somebody who had been on an Iowa farm and had been in Iowa and seen what kinds of responses. That gave me a way of making sense of it.
And what do you think of the criticism by people like Mark Lilla that the left has too much concentrated on identity politics and not being more socialist as they used to be?
Yeah, I think I would say two things. One is from my perspective, first it depends which left you mean. So if by the left you mean mainstream Democratic Party, right? For me, the mainstream Democratic Party has by far not yet done enough to address racial inequality, to address all the kinds of very fundamental, deep inequalities that you have in American society, and the left can go much further in doing that. At the same time, yes, economics disappeared completely. I didn't learn about American economic history. I studied American studies, right? And I did not need to know anything.
What did you study? What did you study? Clips by Madonna?
No, what I studied with American studies, you study different. I study different aspects. So I study, the ways in which, America comes into being, and essentially what I'm looking at is, or what I was taught to look at, is the tension between these very, very powerful ideals that we have in America, which have been mobilizing, which have given a very strong impetus to struggling to have equality and to have justice, and at the same time the way in which in America especially, it's a society that is a very violent society, a very bloody society, and in the process of coming together has done so at the expense of many people's lives and with much pain and violence. And so you have this tension. I mean, so we have a constitution and we have a Declaration of Independence that says all men are entitled to, freedom, written by men who kept other men as property. And that sort of original sin, even as you're, wiping out Native Americans, we're struggling with it. And I think it's a very worthwhile struggle. So I'm very American, that's always to my sense, one of the fundamental American things is you're always struggling against the reality of the failure of America in the name of a higher America.
Is that something you recognize?
Yes, but while she was talking, I was thinking, about also about the kind of people that I grew up with and who are like, even though there's a generation between them, really, pretty much, and how, for instance, take identity politics, for instance. That takes the courage of stepping forth and saying, and being unafraid to say, okay, this is about me. I'm going to talk about me for a minute, because this is important because I represent a lot of other people, and not just myself. There's self-abnegation. The people, the country people, like in Miss Jane's book, in Miss Jane, or don't talk about themselves. The stoicism I was talking about, they couldn't do identity politics because that would seem to be unseemly, And so that sort of, in a way, it's dignified, but it also keeps them in their place and their power to step forward and voice. Their, I think about in Louisiana when Huey Long was campaigning, and he talked to these kinds of people and said, you are the people, you are America, you are the voice, you need to rise up and put me in there so I can do something for you. And I see them responding to something like that. So maybe I'm wrong about Trump, I don't know, but I don't think I think he's not nearly as smart as Huey Long. So I've said before, I don't think I could write. People ask me if I could write memoir, and I've tried, and I can't, and I realize that I still have a strain that these people have. I'm embarrassed to talk about myself. I'm embarrassed to make my own case, you know. And I guess there are a lot of people who are who come from that kind of background and are embarrassed to make their own case, and so they do need someone to give them voice. And if someone can figure out how to do that, they do have a powerful force, you know, in politics on their hands.
I think we can continue the conversation, but I would like to include you and ask your question or make a remark and make it seem like a question. And if you, so I would like to invite you. You can ask any Markha or Brad your questions. There's a mic also. Who wants to kick off? I'm sure there must be some questions about politics. There's a question.
Or literature.
Literature, yeah, but we start with politics then.
I'd like to ask both of you if you have a blog.
I don't, no. I've thought about it. I thought it would be fun. And I've also seen people increase sales of their books by having a popular blog, so it would be a good thing too. But I've never been able to come up with an idea I thought that I could pull off, that what I would be able to write about every week, every day, a week, or even every month, you know, that I thought was interesting.
But you are on Twitter.
I'm on it, but I didn't know I was on it.
Okay.
I mean, my students told me, they said, get on it, and we were in class, and I said, okay, sign me up. We got on, and there came up a message saying, welcome back. I didn't remember that I had ever been on it, so I tweeted something like, I think I tweeted, I like fried eggs. That's all I had to say. And I would love to come up with an idea for something that would really interest me enough to pursue it every week, or just an angle on things, you know. That would be fun, but I don't. I'll take suggestions.
Are you working on a new novel?
Yeah, yes. Not very successfully yet, but you know, it's always
Yes,
disheartening in the beginning because it's so inchoate. You know, it's just like it's like the gases that kind of would like to be a planet, but it's going to take a long time for them to come into a ball.
Is there another question?
Yeah, I don't have I sometimes I have a column for Open Democracy. So when my work at the university gives me the time, then I write there, but no blog, no.
But you wrote a very interesting piece about John McCain, I thought. That's the last one, is it?
Yeah.
And I think so if you look it up, it's easy to find. It's interesting because it describes the both sides that you just described here in one man. So that's very interesting.
You know, someone gave me a copy of the classic, the very popular Dutch novel, The Evenings.
The Evenings, oh yeah.
And I was reading the beginning pages of it over the last couple of days, and his amusing turn and dedication to his devotion to delivering the quotidian in its every little way. And I thought, well, then I just had the thought, well, maybe a blog about all the little dinky things you do trying to write the next book, but that don't really go to the next book, you know, and the dead drafts, the dead ends, and so on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's probably being done a lot, but that's about the closest I've come to an idea for a blog. So
you should do it because I love hearing you talk about it because it's the same struggle I have, but then when I hear it, I'm just always so relieved. You know, so for preparing for today, right, I was looking at interviews and things, and so at moments you were talking about that, and I was just tremendously relieved.
The Evenings is about a kind of forced quiet life, someone who doesn't want to be quiet at all, but has to be forced.
I don't want to be quiet. I want to write the next book, too, so I want it to come a lot easier.
Are there any other questions or remarks? No?
What do you think about where America is going in the next 2 years? Yeah, I think we're, well, we've heard you, and I think most of us are kind of like desperate as what's going to what's going to happen. What do you think? You study teach American studies.
Yeah.
So what's your what do you call it? Postulate.
Well, I think because the basic idea, right, to my sense, the basic idea of something like democracy, or something like American society and the kind of modern societies we have, is that it's not so much that they're always going to do a great job or that there's not going to be moments of crisis, but that we have it within ourselves to correct, to address the challenge. So what I see around me is that, in fact, there's a tremendous amount of energy and mobilization of people trying to figure out all different kinds of ways of responding to the moment. So you see, if you're looking within the Democratic Party, right, you're seeing you're seeing massive numbers of women participating, for example, in the upcoming primaries and the elections and the midterms, more women than we've had before. If you're looking at some of the issues that, for example, I've been looking at the sanctuary movement around undocumented immigrants, and what you're seeing is since the election of Trump, that there's been a massive surge of people actually becoming involved in the sanctuary movement. And I think that this is something that you see in all the different kinds of domains. So one of the effects of Trump, actually, is that people are saying this is serious enough that I need to put my time and energy into getting engaged and into doing something. Something has to happen. And I don't think that's bad.
That's also something you saw with the Parkland shootings.
Yeah.
The students of that, they really turned into a kind of movement. I don't know what the status of them is now, but they were quite forceful and they were not accepting the usual excuses or the kind of prayers and things like that.
Yeah.
And they seem to be more used to the kind of intimidation by Fox News, by these kind of all these, they were not easily intimidated. So that seems to be a new spirit.
Yeah. I mean, you see it also in terms of the impact of the Me Too movement, what's going on with the Kavanaugh hearing now. It's very, very clear that we're not to my sense, in exactly the same place we were, for example, with what happened with Anita Hill and the Clarence Thomas hearings and so forth. So we're seeing, that people are evolving, people are trying things out. And we're, so I tend, and I think in the end, in some ways, it comes down to, are you an optimist or a pessimist, right? And so my sense is, we're going to figure it out. I don't think we've figured it out now. I don't think we have clear, what is our narrative as, progressives. What is our narrative also, in terms of the Democratic Party? There's structural problems with the Democratic Party. I know at the same time we have figured it out in the past. So I'm very much, so that's really what I'm focused on is, if you look at, for example, the election in Florida, you see in a certain sense, right, it's a Trump and a Bernie Sanders, in a certain sense, extension running against each other. So we're going to be struggling through this. And it's a huge struggle. And what I'm hoping is just that it happens without too much violence, and especially because America is a very violent society. I think that there is a chance that there can be a lot more violence before we get it figured out. And in that sense, I'm not optimistic.
Well, Brett, you were just saying that you were hoping for Trump to be a kind of catharsis of this kind of resentment, and are you an optimist or a pessimist?
It's hard to be optimistic. I was talking earlier about how I was worried that Democrats and all voters left and left center and even right, center right, would be able to pull together a vote to challenge in a strong way the very strong and cohesive vote that seems to have pulled Trump into power, and I was worried that that the infighting and the lack of really pulling together and getting the message straight, and deciding on that that if they couldn't do that, that these people who seem to be very, very passionate along very similar lines, there seems to be the parallel lines of their political passions seem to be in a narrower path than I think the Democratic Party's passions. I think we have I worry that we have such a broad array of passions, a spectrum, if you will, that I don't know that it will come in with the same sort of force and pull together the voters who don't necessarily love Trump and don't want Trump, and that they see a full, something they clearly want to vote for and feel passionately about. The way that those people who support Trump feel very passionately about him, and I hope that can happen, but I do worry.
We have the same problem here, I think.
Yeah.
I have room for one more last question. Then. There.
I think that with, for instance, Trump introducing fake news to us, the concept of the truth has become much more fake. And so the difference between stories and facts is also much more fake. Do you think that this will affect literature, and will this be a positive or a negative effect, if so? It's like in general question.
I have worried quite a bit that fiction matters a whole lot less to a lot more people in the United States, and then that has been given more fuel, has been fed into that fire by all of this. I've noticed that a lot of people, ever since I've been writing, I've seen fewer people profess their interest in fiction, and they say things like, I'm interested in true stories. I don't want fiction. And of course, as a fiction writer, novelist, you are trying to write something that's truer than just our everyday sense of things. It brings concentration of a story into something that seems true about human experience. But I see the people who are who have risen up into this movement these days as being having more derisive attitude towards something like novels and fiction, unless they're just action novels or hero novels, hero thrillers, and that sort of thing, and more easily feeling free to be dismissive of stories, especially quiet stories like this one.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So I get a little bit down about that sometimes, because it does seem to be we do seem to be pulled along with that movement and that trend.
But that's a kind of strange paradox, that people want fiction to be more real and reality to be more fiction.
Yeah.
That's. But that's.
They don't trust novels. They don't. I think a lot of the people who I think are in that. Who are the loudest people in America these days do not, I think, truck in fiction. Do not see it as something worth their time.
Because it's not practical enough?
Because it's not. They have a vision of America which is very macho, and doesn't have time for silly stories. They just want things to happen, and they want to make more money, and they want to be able to say what they want to do, and they want to be able to express themselves in whatever way they want, no matter who it hurts. They want power. These are the kind of things that get rolled over. I mean, there's a reason that books like that get burned, in fascist governments, because people think that it's not only that say someone decides that a novel is dangerous because of the ideas it represents. That's sort of under the surface, I think, in America. It's more like this kind of diversion is not worth our time. It's a waste of time.
Yeah, but I have a question about that, because...
Could we
be optimistic.
Convince me otherwise, please.
Yeah, well, no, but the thing is, then, because the question behind it, say, where I'm going to end up. I'll tell you where I'm going to end up, which is, why did you become a writer then? In the sense that, in America, you've always had that, right? America always has been this, macho country, money-chasing country, very interested in power, all those kinds of things. So now we have a different version of it, but all the things you name, I'd say, you look through American history, right, you're going to find them every single step of the way. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that part of writing, right, is that underneath it all, you must have some secret conviction, right, that the truth you tell through fiction, right, so it's fiction that tells the truth, that the truth you tell through fiction has a power to it.
Yes, and I believe when I started, I think I was naive about a lot of those things that you were talking about,
No, you're not.
And I was 19,
Now you're playing the old man, don't do it.
I was an old man then, I guess. No, and I was a little naive about it, and I was also, in love with, enthralled, by the beautiful, the amazing, beautiful and powerful novels that I was reading for the first time, and I said, my God, to be able to do that, it would be something I can hardly imagine being able to do, but I'm going to try it because it seems as if that is the ultimate art. It was for me, and it was the creation of something great and greater than ourselves. I still like to think that. The problem is, and I still think a novel can do that if you can get someone to settle down and read it and absorb it.
Yeah, but you got me to read it. Am I being naive? Okay,
No,
I read your novel.
No.
It touches me.
No,
I think yes, right? And I love it.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very busy, right? I've got way too many things to do at work and so forth, right? And instead, what I think, yes, I want to read this. Okay?
Yeah, you're smart and thoughtful, and you love art.
I think this is the perfect note to end this evening, and I would advise you to do what Markha did, to read the novel, and you're willing to sign some copies.
Yes, certainly.
So I want to thank you so much for talking to me, and thank you for you to listening and asking your questions. And I think there's somewhere it will I don't have to say it. You kunt het zelf lezen. Dancing Bears of liever yours. Nou, ik denk dat de keuze, ieder kan kiezen wat hij wil. Frankenstein, heel interessant, 200 jaar. Hartelijk dank. En we gaan nog even het boeken signeren. En ik hoop u bij een volgende gelegenheid van Be Unlimited weer terug te zien. Dank u wel. Dank je.